questions related to migrant is something which, which is extremely important. So thanks for letting me start. And what I'll do is in the next 10 minutes is kind of give you a layout of what these internal migration that we are talking about these days, kind of a historical mapping of these, of the process of internal migration in India. So as of now, that is based on Census 2011 data, what we have is 450 million people, right, which is 45 crore Indians, are migrants, internal migrants, okay? And which means 37% of total population. Now that's a huge number, right? So 37% of Indian population is mobile. And that makes us think, what are we doing with them? Where are these people? And given the current scenario, suddenly these people, they've become visible, right? Now, if you just go back in the history in India, and if you were to ask me, when did this internal migration or migration within the country started, right? So historically, India has not been a very mobile country. There have been certain waves of mobility though, right? And these waves were kind of, I should say, external waves, right? Which were instrumental in pushing the migration process. So just to give you an example, if you go back in history in the pre-independence time, the establishment of railways was by the British was one such wave, which kind of created or enabled people to be mobile. So that was the time when it was not so much about ability, but was also to some extent forced, right? So labor were transported, they were moved across, but that's nevertheless an important milestone in India's mobility history, right? Then came independence, and we all know our independence struggle, and that's when we had one of the most important and significantly large wave of mobility, which we all know as the partition movement, right? And that's and that the nature of that migration again, or mobility, was forced. Okay, now in the post-independence India, we have a very different kind of migration. Again, there were certain waves, there were certain factors which were instrumental in initiating the process of migration, right? And enabling people to be mobile. And one such wave was the second 5-year plan, or which we call the industrialization in India, where we decided to set up industries in the urban location. So it was guided by many development economic theory. But what it very interestingly did was, it created pathways between rural and urban regions. And if you were to ask me, when do you trace, when did the whole rural-urban migration process started, I would rather say that it was then in the 1955-56 which is what created that space, that pathway for people in the rural areas in India to move to the urban area, right? What we now call as urbanization, right? But at that time, it was more about industrialization. So promoting the industries. There were certain economic structural reasons for that. But nevertheless, it was the policy, the industrial policy, which actually initiated migration. Following the 1955 industrialization, there were several policies, like, for example, the Green Revolution again, which created, again, different pathways of migration. Now, what do these mean? Industrial revolution, Green Revolution, why are we talking about this? Interestingly, when I look at these pathways being generated by such kind of policy, migration, which is the migration was institutionalized, right? Which means that there were certain institutional mechanisms through policies which was promoting migration, whether it was creating opportunities in the urban areas using industries, or creating ports in cities like Mumbai and Kolkata, right? Or whether it was a Green Revolution which created these unequal development in agriculture. So that was mobility in the true sense, right? It was needed, right? and it was motivated, right? So industrialization was basically to motivate people to move from rural areas to urban areas, right? Similarly, to a large extent, Green Revolution, because Green Revolution was not the same across India. The effects of Green Revolution. So this is the most interesting part about internal migration within India. Now, interestingly, some of the literature, early literature, if you study, it tells us, especially coming from the Western context, that rate of mobility of Indians have been historically low, right? Which means, famous, there is someone called Kingsley Davis, right, who's an American sociologist and a demographer. According to him, during the 1950s, when in US, United States of America, the people, if I can say, the propensity, right, of a person being Indians, it was only 3%. So somehow it was concluded that maybe India is not that mobile. I mean, we have these different waves which has propagated mobility, but given a choice, people may not move. There's a lot of inertia possibly. But then when we look at the data, we find a very significant thing. And I think that is a critical thing when we talk about sustainable livelihood, which is, again, comes from the census data. That is, while we said that 450 million people are mobile, and there is internal mobility, right? When we try to break it down, that is when we try to see where these people are going, and not in terms of which state, right, or which city. Rather, if you're simply looking at how many people are actually migrating from one state to another, vis-a-vis how many people are migrating from one district, his or her own district, to another district, vis-a-vis how many people are migrating within districts, okay? That is where we get very interesting results. Now, what did, just going back to Kingsley Davis for a moment, he said that, see, people in India are not mobile because there are certain kind of restrictions, and these restrictions are mostly cultural and language. So you really don't want to migrate to a place which is very culturally and is very different, and they speak a very different language, right? Which we all agree. And now, how do we see that? Because we know that there are people from Orissa migrating to Kerala, right? And this is where data helps us unfold this mystery. So when I said these three categories, that is people migrating interstate, right? People migrating inter-district, and people migrating within a district, we find that the interstate, that is people migrating from one state to another, is only 12%, right? Whereas people migrating within a district is 62%. Right? And this is from census data 2011. I agree, it's kind of dated. But then it is telling us a very critical thing, which means people in India are mobile, right? But they are moving, to nearby places within district. So maybe if you're talking in terms of rural to urban mobility, right, there is a larger propensity of movement to a nearby town, right? If they don't find anything in the nearby town, probably that's when they'll decide on a nearby state. Because moving to a nearby state, where I would agree with Davis, is that you have to overcome a huge cultural and a language barrier, right? So it's not an easy choice for these migrants. So if the migrant is moving, the migrants whom we see today, right, migrating or walking from one state to another, right, they have made a difficult choice, right? So this is not to say that the proportion is not high, but this kind of highlights how a migrant is probably making their choices or the decision to migrate and where to migrate, right? Now, having said that, so, and this is critical, and I'll come to why it is so in a moment. But having said that, what we also have to look at when I say that people's choice or decision to migrate, why are people migrating, right? So whether I'm making a choice from migrating from Orissa to Kerala versus migrating from, say, Maharashtra, one of the districts, to a different, a slightly, the district headquarters or something, right? So that choice, what is guiding that choice, right? So far, again, most of the literature which we see talks about economic reasons, reasons for a search of a better livelihood, which is, again, a very critical component, right? And whomever, whatever research that we have done, it kind of highlights it, right? Even the data tells us that migration happens because of, but in this whole discussion, another thing that we made station, right? And this is to do with a sense of urban aspiration. That is, having an imagination of an urban area, right, where you would like to migrate. So it is not just a livelihood option, well, that is probably there, or I expect it to be there, but also a sense of being in a city, right? Now, this being in a city doesn't really qualify as being well-being, right? So it's not to say that if you're in an urban place, they would, or if they are in an urban place, they imagine it to be a betterment for them or then well-being of them. But nevertheless, there is this urban aspiration which they want to gain, right? And which is quite instrumental in driving the rural to urban migration, urban areas, right? So there is job opportunities, yes. There's a different kind of a living there. You have different kinds of facility there. So these are the expectations based on which the migration is happening. So this is also a critical thing that we need to keep in mind when we think about sustainability or understanding, what should be the third and another critical, we want to have them back, right? Or now they're coming back, we want to retain them back. But what is equally important is to understand which are coming in. And that is what we see very critically in today's time. So when people from Bihar who had migrated are coming back, right? The economy, the Bihar economy is going to take a hit on the workers' remittances. So it is going to undergo a hit, right? So that's also an important thing that we have to keep in mind when we are talking about, what next. So then, given these kind of background issues, the question now is, okay, then what do we do about it, right? What is it that, that we are trying to explain or trying to do here? So we kind of understand who these migrants are, right? Where they are going, why they are going, right? Then what next? Now let me focus a bit on the current scenario, because I'm sure all the other speakers will be building upon that. So current scenario is a very interesting time that we are seeing, right? Now these migrants, as I said, they are not new migrants, right? They have been around, and 1950s, ever since we've had industrialization, they have been pouring in, right? Only thing is that now suddenly they have become visible, right? Now their numbers are being talked. But you'd be surprised to know that even if you today, like, you want to find out what is the exact number of migrants in India, right? Internal migrants, you'll still not find a very concrete data, right? Because census measures it in a certain manner, NSS measures in a certain manner, which effectively means that we don't really have a definition of these migrants. Okay, who these people are, how do you categorize them, how do you capture them? So given that restriction, we are saying that yes, there are migrants, there are people, right, who are not living in their usual place of residence, and now suddenly they have become visible. They are everywhere. All news channels are talking about them. All different kinds of figures are given about them, right? So we are saying 8 crores of migrants, right? And we keep hearing about these figures, and we are not questioning them because we have no reference figure to compare it with, right? So who are these 8 crores? In fact, that's again a very qualifying thing. These 8 crores are basically kind of recognized or identified migrants, right? They are not overall migrants. So all those things are it's kind of making things more visible, right? So migrants have become more visible. It's as if they are all around us, right? So given that they've become more visible, now we have started wondering, okay, now that they're leaving their work in the cities, they're coming back to villages, right? How are things going to unfold? First of all, how are cities going to cope with that, right? Because if I give you an example, in Ahmedabad, around 10% of the population are migrants, okay? So it's a huge number, right? So, and if the entire 10% leaves, so there's a lot of work which kind of, or the economy, right? Or work in the economy which needs to be done in a certain manner, right? So the question is to those cities, and a more pertinent question that I feel I thought you're asking in your series of webinar is that, what do you do about these migrants, or what do they do when they go back home, right? So now there are two things that we can think about here, right? One is, and many of the reports, I just read a report recently today. I have my serious doubts on the validity of that. But anyways, if I have to quote it, they are saying that 1 out of every 5 migrant wants to go back to the city, right? So migrants who've come back, out of 5, every, 1 migrant wants to go back. Now, I really don't know. I'm not sure about that. Maybe, may not be, right? But even if, he or she does that, right? What is it that he or she can do, right? Or how can he, make a choice there, right? So, and these are the critical questions that we should be asking, not just in the rural area, but also for the urban areas, right? Now, in terms of certain kinds of, again, historically, certain kinds of things that have been worked, that have been tried out. We all know of rural employment schemes, and today's announcement where they have increased the outlay in the Manrega scheme, right? So again, there are jobs being created, given all the loopholes. If we don't talk about them, we know that there have been initiatives taken there, right? But again, the question is, if it was already there, then why wasn't it working earlier, right? Why were people still moving out? Was it insufficient, or was it something which probably people did not want? So is there any way we can think in a slightly different manner about rural employment, right? Second comes the skill development, right? So skill development, again, is a very interesting thing, where the idea, again, was to, promote certain kind of skilled work rather than unskilled work, which is what Manrega was mostly to do, right? But we saw that the skilled development was, at least in certain states, were acting in a slightly different manner. That is, people were using these skill development programs to migrate. So they were making them more able to migrate to a different place, right? So it was, again, so whatever policy we have tried out, it seems like, even though we may want them to be there, right, they're using that or utilizing that to go out, right? And hence, we need to maybe critically think about, what is it that these people may want, right? Could it be to do with their aspirations? If it is so, then how can we address those issues in the aspirations so that we can hold them back, if I can say that, right? Or we can keep them in their places of origin. Or just imagining it in this way, that if not in their place or the rural areas, right, given the non-viability of agriculture, again, a lot has been talked about it, maybe to the nearest town, because remember, that is what the data is telling us, right? That is, they are moving, but their first choice is probably the nearest towns. So instead of focusing on cities as the hub of migration, right, or trying to retain them in their rural setting, right, maybe thinking about it in a slightly different manner and trying to think about these smaller towns where we can imagine certain kind of employment guarantees or livelihood options where these people can move, right? So I think, yeah, I'll stop there and let others.
Thank you so much. I think, ma'am, that was a great introduction to start with. And now I would like to request Mr. Nazrul Haq to give us a brief analysis of the existing scenario and what should be the key focus of the government post COVID-19. Over to you, sir.
Yeah. Hi, Saurabh. Thank you to Saurabh and your team for organizing this. And thank you, Pooja. You really laid down the foundation very well. So let me just, Pooja has raised some of these issues, but let me just state 2-3 basic foundations which I am thinking on. Is that when we think about the current crisis, economic crisis or livelihood crisis, we should not only concentrate only on the COVID-19 and the subsequent lockdown, which kind of accelerated the crisis, because for the last many decades, it was very clear that India was in a very peculiar economic situation in terms of entire job growth, in terms of entire sustainability of our cities as well as villages, as well as small towns, the condition was not very stable at all. And for a country like India, it is much more important because for last 2 decades, and for last 2 decades, we have been going through our demographic dividend phase, and that will continue at least till 20 or 2045. That means that we are a very young country, right? So almost 60% of our citizens are below 30 or 25 years of age, and all of them need meaningful engagement. Now, the entire thrust of our development policies, entire thrust of what Pooja also said, our skill development policies, and various other, some of these growth sectors like, for example, IT, the thrust was very clear that rural economy is not working, the farm-based livelihoods can't engage people, so many young people. So by skilling or by or through any other means, we must make people go out from villages to cities. But what COVID-19 and the lockdown has shown us that in that whole, through that whole mechanism, forget about our cities, our small towns, villages, none of these entities are now sustainable. But my only request to everyone is that we should not think that only COVID-19 is the crisis. If within say 1.5 years or maybe in the near future some vaccines plus medicines come, everything will be again fine. No, it is not like that. It can be a health crisis today. It can be some other crisis, for example, erratic monsoon, very long season of summer, which are all coming. I mean, we all know the climatic change that is occurring everywhere. So basically, we need to think of this crisis as an opportunity to discuss that what went wrong and how do we need to reimagine our entire economic structure, our entire workforce distribution. So in that, so let me first take cities. I think it is very clear that the whole model of creating few big metros or few big cities as our complete engines of economic development is non-viable at all. For example, now IT was touted as the most, as the sector which is employing the most number of our youths. Now, the signals that we are getting from IT is that they are thinking of that at least 50 to 70% of their people can actually work from home. Now, it may look like a very good thing, but we must understand that through all these IT growth, lots of ancillary livelihoods were created. For example, housekeeping people who are taking care of all these offices, the auto-wallahs, cabs, restaurants, and so on and so forth. So, and all of these are actually people who migrated from villages to cities like Bangalore, where I am currently, and started working. So basically, with the entire rethinking about IT from the sector itself, all these livelihoods opportunities will collapse. So I'm just giving one example of IT, but I'm sure that if we analyze more deeply, it will happen to all other sectors which we touted as our growth engines. So basically, in cities, I think the crucial point for all corporates, all industrials to think that profit making can't be the only motive of running their business anymore. Profit is not a bad thing. I'm not against it, but only profit making as the sole idea of running a business is not going to work any longer. So basically, for example, then how do you reorganize economic structures in cities? Maybe industries can think of creating workers living, areas just near to the industrial locations. Basically, taking care of their stay, basic hygiene, food, everything within that industrial space itself. It will, of course, it will take some amount of money out of their revenues, but in the long run, what is going to happen that it will create businesses more viable. For example, just again to give one example, just like IT, if construction builders allowed their workers a better living space wherever they are situated, I don't think that crores and crores of construction workers would have started walking back to their homes. So I think that need to be one of our priorities. And secondly, the entire livelihood or decent livelihood opportunities, entire work, the entire concept of work has to be shifted towards not only villages, to our small towns as well. And how can we do about it? I think for a young country like India, it is an imperative and it is a must that everyone needs to be meaningfully engaged. Of course, questions of aspirations and all these are there, but sometimes aspirations are also skewed by all kinds of outside pressures like media, like corporate, some kind of imaginary dreams that corporates show people, and sometimes, unfortunately, through our education process as well. So I think now of course, MNREGA is a very great scheme, and I'm very glad that the current government is actually rethinking about MNREGA again. But I don't think that people who will move back to villages now, and they have almost moved back, everyone can be engaged in a decent livelihood through MNREGA alone. So we can think of 5-6 big buckets of work in our villages. For example, can farming be seen as a broader agriculture activity? So basically, farming, not only doing farming in the fields, but understanding it as a larger life and livelihood activity encompassing all the other factors of agriculture. For example, livestock, for example, poultries, integrated farming with some kind of floriculture, horticulture, and so on and so forth. And wherever possible, trying to use indigenous breeds of our seeds. Why it is important? I'm not only coming from ecologically sustainable point of view, but it is proven in certain states of India, for example, Manipur, that indigenous breeds of seeds are actually much more resilient in the current climatic situation. So basically, thinking of a very different kind of agriculture activities, integrated agriculture activities with all components of agriculture activities, so that more and more people can be engaged. Secondly, not everyone in villages will be interested in farming or agriculture activities, right? So what other non-farm activities can be thought about in our villages? For example, many of our Indian places are actually historically very good in their local crafts or local artisanal products. Unfortunately, we have created and that is one reason that due to this COVID-19 lockdown, after farmers, the second largest group of people who were affected are the artisans or people who are engaged in handicrafts. Why? Because we always thought that these products only need to go to the city markets. For example, Delhi Hat, for example, Pragati Maidan in Delhi, and so on and so forth. Can we think of a different kind of market arrangement also associated with some kind of prestige for the people? For example, if in a village, the communities, or not one village, I'm saying in one geographical region, the communities are engaged in a very innovative bamboo work. Can it lead to not only their income, but also some kind of prestige associated with the work. So that may also in the long term take care of the aspirational part for the youth, because otherwise youth always think that there is nothing in my place, I need to move out to the cities. And similarly, as I said, that not everyone may be interested in farming activities. So can more and more youths then go towards some kind of productions within the small towns and villages? Because it looks like that we have almost completely denied that space of thinking. I mean, we think that any kind of production must happen in big industrial spaces. So basically, I think that this is the time when we need to relook into our family-based production centers, small community-based production centers, where a group of you come together, state will help them, and they can produce or they can process things, and these things may be their own products from their farms in a very innovative manner, and which can go to the nearest towns, nearest cities, or cities like Bangalore, Delhi, Kolkata, and so on, or metros like Bangalore, Delhi, like that. Now, how do you generate this kind of skills? So that is where the whole concept of rethinking skill development will come. Till now, the entire idea of skill development is that people need to be trained in around 7 to 8 core skills, and we must remember that these core skills are all industrial, urbanized core skills. For example, people are being skilled for IT BPO, people are being skilled for construction, security activities. People are being skilled for some kind of beauty technician kind of job. So there are 7, 8 core sectors which Government of India have focused for the last few years. The idea is very simple, that youth should be skilled and then move to cities and get work. And we know, and the figures from NSDC, National Skill Development Corporation, is very clear that they are not, I mean, these sectors are not generating enough job to actually absorb people. So can we then reimagine skill development in our entire, conversation? So what kind of skills we would require for people to make a decent living in small towns and villages? So we all can think and list down some of these. As I said that, basic marketing of their own crafts products can be one. Processing of their own farm products or non-farm products, which are produced locally, can be one. Water crisis is going to be very big for not only India, for the entire world in the future. And my guess is that after COVID-19, India is going to face the second biggest crisis in water. So can there be more skilled people to manage our water resources locally? Can there be people who are skilled to, work towards renewable energy production as well as distribution? For example, solar energy. I still remember a few years back, I was in a forest-based village in near Dhamtari in Chhattisgarh, where lots of mohua, which was kind of abundant there, was going west because people, when people were going and collecting mohuas from forests, they were completely abundant with mohuas, but then market is not, the demand from the market is not high, but when demands from the market is there, by then the mohuas are spoiled, wasted. So actually some of these people, and through the interventions of some of these NGOs, they use very innovative solar drying technologies, right? And very innovative, so that these mohuas can be dried and then packed, and then whenever the mohuas are not coming from forest, those can be sent to market and it can bring some income to the community. But the only unfortunate point I could see in that in those initiatives, that people from some corporates were actually managing those solar dryers. because no one in the villages could even think that they can gain those skills. But if you really see that skills like water management, right? I mean, for example, I know skills to engage more in energy sector are not that which can be picked by our youths. So I think we need to use this COVID-19 plus lockdown crisis as an opportunity. I mean, it's unfortunate that to talk about some of these things, that how do we reorganize economic structure? How do we think of our livelihood in a very different manner now, organized towards our villages and small towns? How do we think of skill development in a very innovative manner? How do we think of production and consumption now, keeping in mind sustainability of our communities? I think that is what I had been thinking from last few days, and we can talk more about that.
Thank you, sir. That was indeed a very eye-opening ground level reality that you have kind of spoke about. Mr. Ranjan would not be able to join us because he just got a sudden call from the CMO, but he has promised that he would send his video recording, and that would be updated in the Facebook page. So now we are moving to Mr. Atin Biswas. And Mr. Atin Biswas has been a person who has worked a lot at the ground, the root level, and also worked with the Panchayat Raj Development Authority in West Bengal. So, Atin, the question which I would be very curious to get answer from you is that, see, India is trying to shift its policy focus on self-sufficiency, with the mantra that vocal for local with global touch. What do you think should be the immediate measures of the government, and what measures they must undertake to revamp the rural economy? Or if I can also ask you that the global tender to disallow up to 200 crores. So this will have a tremendous dependency, I would say, on the MSMEs. So are they ready with such huge factors of production and capital, and meet the demand and supply? If not, what do you think would be the roadmap? Over to you, Atinda.
Yeah, thank you, Saurav. And I'm really happy to be a part of this web discussion. And I apologize at the beginning because I missed a large part of this discussion because of some technical glitches. Given that I'm not so digitally challenged, but I actually struggled to, get the audio, and I missed the entire duration of the first speaker, Madam Guha, and I could hear the last about 5 minutes of what Mr. Nazrul has spoken about. So I received an email from Saurav, and in that email, basically I was asked to talk about how we are equipped with policy in the given situation in the wake of this pandemic to address the migrant laborers. Now, since I missed a large part of the discussion initially, some of the issues that I am going to share with my colleagues here, might sound like a repetition. So I apologize for that. So when we talk about policies, basically let us get our facts right. Let us get the numbers right first. By migrant laborers, we are roughly talking about a population close to 300 million, right? So that's about 30 crore, which is nearly a third of the country's population. Okay, so it's a very big number. So whenever we talk about policy or reform or program or strategy or whatever at Government of India level or state level or at the grassroots level, we always have to keep these numbers in mind, right? Now this number basically, the most unfortunate part of the whole story is no one, I have been a development practitioner for more than last 2 decades. No one is having a comprehensive database about what this number actually is, what kind of occupation they are engaged into, because these are quote unquote informal sector. And, the reason why they don't feature in any of the 5-year plan or, major, policy directives historically in independent India is just because they are irrelevant and they don't feature in the vote bank politics, is because of the nature of their occupation. They're relocating from their own place to the place of the destination where basically they are going to work. So their presence in the vote bank politics is absolutely missing, and this is exactly why today we are discussing about this poor migrant laborers in the wake of this pandemic. And this pandemic has done havoc to them. So many people have lost their lives, and my heart bleeds when I see them on the television channel or newspaper. So just coming back to the point, right? So historically they have been ignored just because they are unorganized, they are voiceless, they are informal, and there is very little or say no data available to kind of plan for them, right? We have about 10 states which are so-called the top sources, starting from UP, Bihar, Chhattisgarh, the northern region, to Andhra Pradesh, Jharkhand, West Bengal. And the destinations are roughly, Delhi, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Haryana, Punjab, Karnataka, Kerala, and a little bit of Tamil Nadu. Now, the issue we have here is basically now they're coming back, right? So in migration, I'm sure my colleagues have already spoken about this. In migration, there are push factors, there are pull factors. Basically, the push factors are the factors which basically create a compelling situation for the migrants to move out of their own places to a place of work. And the pull factor is the factor that basically attracts them to that destination. And then there are some risk factors. Now the risk factors, basically the list is huge. And the recent addition, which is unprecedented and unwarranted, and no one was basically prepared about it, is this pandemic, right? So this pandemic has left millions of these migrant laborers jobless, shelterless, foodless. They're starving, and the situation has been created almost overnight. Okay. Now, I am my work life has been mostly concentrating around the rural areas. So I have very little exposure of working in the urban areas. So in my discussion, I will just touch base few key issues which are going to affect the rural population and the system of rural governance, right? So just to put things in perspective, I will split my discussion into few specific points. So now they're coming back, and as soon as they comes back, we need to give them relief. So for relief, we have a public distribution system. So they've provided free food grains as per the available government directive. This food grains would be given until the month of September. After that, I don't know.
Hello.
Okay.
Satinder,
So
we just lost your voice.
Is it?
Yeah, for a few seconds or so. Yeah, you're back.
Okay. Okay. Am I audible now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So Manrega was introduced in 2006 exactly for this objective, so that we can provide employment at local level to create durable assets at the village level in the lean period. So lean, by saying lean period, is the non-cultivation period when people are basically looking for work elsewhere. So if I pick my own state as an example, so in West Bengal we have roughly 5.5 million migrants. Okay, and if I go with this urban rural ratio of the migrants, so roughly 60 to 65%. As I mentioned earlier, there is no specific data available, and this is exactly why talking about migrant laborers is always a challenge. Now, out of this 5.5 million, if I just go with this percentage of rural migrants, the number comes to somewhere around 3.46 million, right? which estimates to be 8.5 lakh households, right? Now we have, so I'm just putting these numbers right before my colleagues, just to give you an idea that this is the population, or this is the number of households that are my universe if I am talking in West Bengal perspective. So government of West Bengal, while planning or while introducing any policy reforms, will have to keep this number into consideration. So we have around 21 districts and roughly 3,400 gram panchayats. So if I take them down to the grassroots level, it roughly accounts to around 260 to 300 households per gram panchayat. Okay. Now, as Government of India says that they would be provided job under Manrega scheme, right? So in Manrega, in West Bengal, the state average is about 55 days out of 100. This is the average of the last 3 years. It went up to 74, and because of election, it came down again. So therefore, if I just go with this state average out of the threshold of 100 days, then I have to create roughly 30,000 additional man days at the Gram Panchayat level to immediately provide them some employment, to give some wages in their pocket to help them survive, right? Now I'm going to split this recommended measure into various points. As I was hearing Mr. Nazrul, he has already covered the skill development part, so I will skip that part as much as possible. So the immediate measures are relief. So reliefs are being provided in the form of PDS. The next measure is wage employment, right? They are coming back, they are jobless, they are starving. So we need to give them some money. So they can be immediately, enrolled into Manrega. The government could give them job cards and they could be provided jobs under various schemes. And I'll just elaborate these points one after the other. I'm just listing out the salient features. So relief, wage employment. Third part is the convergence part, right? Till date, Manrega is operating almost in silo. Apart from, there are very few examples of good practices where basically there has been some, examples of departments reaching out to each other, talking to each other to ensure, financial and technical collaboration to provide wage employment as well as skill development training to these people. The third point is skill development, and for skill development, the available instruments are, the livelihood missions or Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana. And the latest addition in this list is this declaration of this Atmanirbhar Bharat campaign, this stimulus financial package worth 20 lakh crore. And in this package, there is a specific fund earmarked for MSMEs. And at this point of time, we are waiting for more detail on how it is going to be implemented and what are the operational guidelines, and how these migrant laborers being envisioned to to fit into this thing. Now, while the Gram Panchayat basically prepares labor budget for Manrega. So right now the Gram Panchayat needs to prepare labor budget to accommodate this additional migrant laborers who are coming back to their respective villages. So one policy reform has to be, we have to immediately increase the allocation of Manrega from 100 days to at least 150 days. I was just hearing some, some economic experts in the national television who have already proposed to Government of India to increase the ceiling from 100 days to 150 days, or if possible even to 200 days. But then everything comes down to institutional capacity, regardless of whichever number we increase this mandates to. Eventually it will come down to the Panchayati Raj institution, how much capable they are to prepare the labor budget, create an inventory of works and give them wage employment, because it's a huge workforce and it's a real challenge to manage them on ground. Convergence of Manrega with various livelihood opportunities. Now here is a handicap, right? In the system of PRI administration, we have district panchayat, and then we have the office of the district magistrate, as the government counterpart, right? So we have elected representative, a bunch of elected representative, and the appointed representative to support them. But at the Gram Panchayat level, there is nothing. So the presence of line department basically ends at the block level, and the departments like fisheries, sericulture, horticulture, agriculture, RKBY, animal husbandry, so on and so forth. The presence of all this department basically ends at the block level. So the hubs, the epicenters, which direct has a human interface to provide support at the grassroots level, are the Gram Panchayats and the block administration, right? Now, MGNRDGS has clearly defined 9 sectors where you can, which can be included in the planning. To broad base this thing, Ministry of Panchayati Raj has introduced the Gram Panchayat development plan, so that everything doesn't get confined within Manrega, and the scope of Manrega can be increased to fit in the activities of these line departments, so that the Manrega beneficiaries can be provided with the benefits of this specific line departments. They can be provided with trainings, they can be provided with exposure, and they can be also provided with some credit linkage, so that they can start their business. Now, IBS, the individual benefit scheme, is one such opportunity where basically the governments try to give them assets in the form of seedlings or response or pisciculture, horticulture, sericulture, fish farming, animal husbandry. So they are given cattle, they are given goats, they are given buffaloes. So they can start something. So this basically, the inputs which are given basically are direct assets to the household and some skill training. And the other criteria for this individual benefit scheme is basically the beneficiary should have some amount of land. Okay. And here the integration of Manrega comes. Like if I have some cattle, I can use that dung to produce vermicompost, and to produce the vermicompost, I need a shed which can be created from Manrega, and the household who is going to be the beneficiary, they can work as unskilled laborer themselves. So this is one of the way forwards. Now, convergence is much easier said than done, right? We talk about convergence at national level, at state level, in big occasion, but convergence don't really happen on the ground. This is a very this is very unfortunate, but this is the reality. Now, if we try to ensure wage employment on a sustainable basis at the ground level for these migrant laborers, we have to cut this barrier of individual line departments operating in silo, and the schemes which are being implemented directly by the PRIs are also operating in isolation, right? This has been a traditional challenge, right? And the other issue I would like to flag here is that this line department that I was talking about, they don't have a panchayat window in their departmental budget. This is a huge handicap, and this is exactly why a block basically deals with a population of roughly 200,000. I'm just talking about West Bengal perspective. So for 2 or 3 officials from a line department representative, for example, say horticulture or agriculture, dealing with such a huge population with the benefit of each and every available scheme is a huge challenge. So the interface between, so if that department creates a panchayat window and the fund is devolved right at the level of the Gram Panchayat, and there are block officials who are basically there to provide all sorts of technical support to the Gram Panchayat. It's a kind of extension. We are aware about how extension basically works. So it's a idea of extension activities. Now, creating this panchayat window in the departmental budget, in the line department budget, right from Government of India to the grassroots level, is the need of the hour. The other issue that I would like to flag here is the redistribution of the lands, the wasted lands. I mean, it has been tried already, and West Bengal is one of the forerunners in the land reform sector. thousands and thousands of households have been given pattas, those who were landless. So we need to revamp that exercise to explore how many of these migrant laborers are actually landless, and how the how this redistribution of land among the landless laborers can be taken forward. The other part is, as I mentioned earlier, is the skill development. So if we categorically see the sectors where these migrant laborers are employed, I was just I was being a part of a relief operations with some of my friends. We generated some funds to provide relief operations in some of the nearby districts close to Kolkata, and I was accidentally talking to some of the people who have just managed to reach home after walking about 600 to 1,000 kilometers for about 10 to 15 days. What I learned from them is basically, I had a question in my mind, is basically whether migration is a choice or a compulsion or a little bit of both. What I've learned from the people, I'm not trying to generalize what I have discussed with some of the migrant laborers who have just managed to reach home, is basically it's a little bit of both. He is having a job card. He is not seeking job from the Gram Panchayat in his own area. Instead, he is choosing to go somewhere where the wage is much higher, right? So there are many other factors which are basically triggering this issue of migration, but at the local level they are lacking skill, and this is exactly why majority of them are either construction workers or domestic helps or street vendors. So I mean, I am not an expert of migration, but whatever little I have studied and whatever little reports I have come across, I have seen that majority of them are circular migrants or seasonal migrants and occupied in these sectors. So the absence of skill is a phenomena which is very, very evident. Now, if we have to think about a sustainable mechanism to give them wage employment, ensure some sort of security, give them financial security, give them bring them under the umbrella of some insurance facility. So we have to think about how we can expose them to certain skill development activities. So we have some instruments available like the National Rural Livelihood Mission, the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana, and the recent addition is the Jal Jeevan Mission, and obviously this stimulus COVID package worth 300,000 crore to promote the MSMEs. Now, to conclude, whatever discussion we have had so far, we need to have an institutional mechanism to basically implement this, right? Now, here comes the role of the NGOs, the private players, the academic institutions, and the multilateral donors like the UN organizations or the bank or the Asian Development Bank, who are basically waiting for government to ask for assistance to design projects and implement them side by side. Now, since GP and block is at the epicenter of the whole intervention, therefore extensive capacity building of both elected and appointed representatives is the need of the hour. No intervention can sustain unless there is a strong market linkage and private players are involved to address the local demand. Therefore, I set up a group, I link them to the credit institution, I link them to some skill training, they produce something, and then there is no market or they cannot survive the competition to sell out their product, as because there are already 100 players who are probably selling the same product at a cheaper price. So this is also a challenge that we have to explore avenues. How do we address them? The role of NGOs, which unfortunately has not been spoken in the recent past, ever since this pandemic has surfaced. The role of NGOs is going to be very, very critical in this scenario to address this issue, is because the NGOs bring a different set of skill set, a different set of mobilization capacity and ground-based support to all the stakeholders to help prepare a comprehensive plan, right? So the government must step forward and create an environment, invite the NGOs to work, to make this reforms and make this efforts a reality. And then to address, like, if we try to increase the Manrega, ceiling from 100 days to 150 to 200 days, or if we try to integrate the existing rural workforce, including those who are coming back as migrant laborers, to the existing flagship programs. The programs which are implemented by line department don't really have a panchayat interface there. So creating a budget in their, a panchayat window in their budget, so that more funds can be devolved to the PRIs and it reaches the beneficiary. So all these issues has to be addressed in the respective, policies of the respective departments and ministry. Now the irony here is that the rural governance matter is basically dealt by two central ministries at the Government of India level, which is the Ministry of Panchayati Raj and Ministry of Rural Development. Now the government this time has to demonstrate a mechanism that all these ministries will come together, join hands for technical, financial, and whatever resource they have to collaborate. And then this mechanism will percolate at the state level, and then after that up to block, district block, and maybe at the village level. So the task is very, very challenging, a lot to be done. And then it is not about just introducing schemes here and there and telling the migrants that, okay, you go back home and we will provide you wage employment under Manrega. It is not easy unless we prepare the institutions, unless we equip the institution to deal with such numbers. So with this, I conclude my whatever little I had to discuss, and I apologize if I have exceeded the time. And now, if there are any questions from my colleagues, I'll be happy to answer if I can.
Atindra, thank you so much for your views, and I think just to raise another question here is that the government has a certain role to play to ensure that people get certain kind of government benefits and livelihood schemes, or a beneficiary can get some amount for certain time. But after that, if we are talking about making the MSMEs more competent, so we have to also ensure that this individual MSMEs, the individual players, also build up their capacity to enhance the production process, to kind of ensure a more modernized way of marketing their products, competing with rivals. And when you're talking about making it global, so a lot of capacity building process is involved. And this gives rise to thinking that what would enhance the entrepreneurial capacity within the people in the rural setup, because we have seen the rural livelihood mission of India. But here mainly we see the SHGs who are approached by some NGOs, they have given some fund, and maybe they're asked that what kind of business you want. So they propose something, and they are giving training on that. But in the larger picture, if you see, we want to have a very sustained kind of a business model, or a very upscaled version of the business model. They should be made aware of the larger market demand and supply. So that kind of environment, how do we foresee to happen, and how that can happen? My question is open to all the three speakers, and I think we have exceeded the time also. With this, we can just close our session today. Atindra, if you would like to pick up.
Okay. The question was for me. Okay, I thought. I mean, there
yeah,
maybe
the other two speakers can take it on after you give your.
Okay. No, we already have about 19 participants right now with us, as I can see on Zoom. Saurabh, I have some experience of the National Rural Livelihood Mission and the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana. These efforts basically, these are first of all PMKVY and NRLM are very different as far as their modus operandi. Okay, where NRLM basically focuses on agro-based and allied agro-based activities at the rural level, which are more suited to the kind of population we are discussing here, right? Whereas PMKVY basically focuses on more on the technical side, like like if you are willing to personal wellness training or computer hardware training, or training which are more suited to the industrial sector. I'm not an expert of that, but whatever little I have learned. So if in the rural areas, I'm just reiterating it because I have very little experience of working in urban areas, so my colleagues can probably comment better on the urban the scenario. In rural areas, entire the chain of affairs are managed by the PRI institutions and the block development office. Okay, it's a hub. Now, identifying a group of people and then giving them a skill set to encourage them to become entrepreneur, linking them with the credit institution. Thank God this MSME, at least in this stimulus package, basically talks about collateral free credit, right? So the credit institution will not ask for anything to be as a security, which is a typical practice for any credit institution to give loan. Now in the long run, where this effort basically faces a hiccup is when they start producing. Overnight you cannot be an expert of everything, right? You have a skill to produce something, then you get the money, you buy the machineries, you earn the skill, and you start producing something. When it comes to linking with the market, and then you basically start facing the competition where the other players with similar products are already waiting over there, the problem starts there. Now this is an area where, so basically the government will have to guide this group of people whom we are basically seeing as potential entrepreneurs with the information. Like if I am going to encourage a group to set up a goattery or a piggery or a dairy farm or a poultry farm, these are more suited to their indigenous knowledge, because they are born and they are born in rural areas, and they have grown up seeing all these things in their localities. So and these are far more sustainable as compared to the other typical industrial produces which basically are sometimes stuck in the market just because of the competition factor. So this is, I mean, from my side, it is just not about giving them credits or giving them some skill training to produce something. The real picture begins after that, and there has to be resources at the government side, at the NGO side, at the the collaborators who have those kind of a skill set. When you bring them on board, they are basically guide you to to show you the big picture, and kind of then you can move ahead. Then you get the confidence. The idea that the stimulus package is very new, and there are a lot of red tapeism also involved, because getting these loans traditionally, what I have seen, is not a very easy thing. If the government uncomplicates this mechanism of promoting the MSME, I'll be more than happy to see that.
Thank you, Atindra. Ma'am, if you can make some concluding remark, and then we will move to Ms. Rulsa.
Yes. So just continuing with what Atin just said. See, my take on this whole MSME kind of a drive is slightly different. While it is kind of a welcoming thing when you say that they are being given more loans towards capacity building, to a more empowerment, right? And this whole move towards localization, right? At the same time, what we have to think, and also in the context of the current situation, that so it's mostly a supply side kind of a push, right? You're helping them to produce more. So my question, and it's completely my kind of my opinion, is that where is the demand? So just to give you a context, right? And here again, since Atin has spoken extensively about rural, similar things you find in urban as well. you have these micro enterprises in urban areas, right? Again, there are certain nuances. They may or may not be registered. So all those things are there. But suppose some of them, for example, the street vendors or petty shops, right? They get the loan and they want to do capacity building, right? What is the use? Where is the market now, right? What is the kind of speculation about their future in terms of market linkage, right? So those are the questions which needs to be answered. So currently, if you look at the policy, loan waivers or loans without collateral, that definitely has a long-term repercussion. But right now, what we also want is also certain kind of a shorter-term impetus, right? So what is different push, right, for the long-term growth focus. Currently, you need certain short-term intervention and critical short-term interventions as well, right? And also about this localization, what I feel is we already had it, right? It was already proposed in 2014 when something like Make in India was proposed. And again, MSME was, in some sense, it was being discussed, right? Now what we see is in a slightly different avatar where we are talking about, we are looking at these more of artisans and skills in the rural areas, right? And mostly talking about the micro enterprises. So I think that is where the problem is. You know, when we say MSME, we have micro, small, and medium enterprises, right? Enterprises. And so far, our focus have been on these smaller and medium enterprises, right? Micro is something which is rarely talked about, and only now you started talking about them. But then again, the approach has been supply driven, right? So that is where I have my reservation, that unless we have a market for them, unless we make them as what Atin was saying, that we can link them up with the markets, they understand what the big picture is, these kind of stimulus may not work, right? They may just take up the loan, and that's usually what you see, and it might get absorbed in other kinds of consumption and not really in the production process, right? So that is what broadly my worry is, or my take is. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Nazrul sir, if you can make your concluding remarks.
No, yeah, thank you, Saurabh. No, I don't have much to add, but on this last point, I just want to add one thing, that, when it comes to a micro enterprise related production system, although Pooja is saying that it is a supply side push, and where would be the market? I think the consumption can be driven locally also. So I don't know how the whole structure is imagined now, but perhaps there can be a way out if we. As I stated in my opinion in the first time when I spoke here, that if you really rethink about our economic structure, about our work distribution from cities to small towns and villages, perhaps some solution can be thought about. And Saurabh, regarding your question that how do you build this entrepreneurial mindset? When it comes to mindset, one big elephant in the room would be our entire education system also, which I think, I'm not talking about a very short-term approach, but in the long run, I think how we organize our education system, what kind of objectives, what kind of aspirations we are giving to our kids through our education system is also going to play a big role. So in the long run, we must keep education in mind, and we must start intervening it from now onwards. Yeah. So that is all.
Thank you, sir. I think it was a really a very nice, informative session, and it will certainly help us a lot, provided us a lot of clarity to further research and think from a different lens. And I'm really grateful to all the panelists for giving us this time. And sorry for the technical glitch we had, for which we got half an hour delay. Ma'am, sir, Mr. Atin, thank you so much for your time. And we hope that with your blessings and good wishes, we can take this initiative forward. And we have a list of events, and we have decided on different speakers from different background to come and talk to us. and we hopefully will be able to take this forward. Thank you again from my entire team, and my team here comprises of Pradeep. He is also from Azim Premji University. Basant, he is a former fellow of Ministry of Water and Sanitation, and now he's working the aspirational district program. And we have Isha. She was also a former fellow from Water and Sanitation Ministry. And also we have Pradeep with us. He was a former Maharashtra CM fellowship. And they also have quite a lot of experience in the ground. And I hope with the experience we have and with the knowledge we are getting from distinguished panels like you, we'll be able to take this initiative forward and we'll be able to have more clarity on our thought process. Thank you so much once again for your time and your patience.
Thank you, Saurabh.
Thank you.
Thank you, Saurabh.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, bye everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you, Saurabh, for this webinar. Yeah.
Thank you. And also a big thank you to the audience. You have been extremely patient and disciplined. And thank you for your cooperation, and hope you stay updated with our page in Facebook. We'll update our events and our announcements in that page. Thank you so much.